Welcome to our latest panel, Optimising Your Real Estate, Designing the Next Generation HQ, where we'll be looking at how design and operations can help to meet the future needs of the way we're going to work in the future. I've got the pleasure of moderating this panel, and we've got a fantastic lineup of speakers to take you through this incredibly important topic. So we've got Kimberly Matthews, Director of the Interiors team at Gardner and Theobald, Petr Esposito, co-founder and Director of ThirdWay Architecture, Oliver Knight, Director of Offices at Landsec, and Dishley Guntus, founder of HGG London. Before we actually get started, a huge thank you, as always, to our partners for this particular panel, Gardner and Theobald and ThirdWay. The teams there have been absolutely invaluable in helping us sort of craft this session, so thank you so much to them. So into our topic itself. We've heard a lot throughout the panels today about attracting the workforce back to the office, how owners and operators are going to need to provide the type of space that it's really worth travelling in for and getting us out of our homes. An office fit out and how it'll be used is obviously a huge part of that, and creating that employee experience. So what are the design trends that are becoming integral to how the HQ will be used in future for different types of occupier? Kimberly, if I can throw that one to you first, what are the sort of trends that you're starting to see coming through at the moment?
Sure, thanks Mike. So I think initially throughout the past year or so, we saw quite a few of the big tech giants having some knee-jerk reactions to the pandemic. Obviously a lot of the focus was on health and safety and well-being of the employees, and how the office can be suitably designed to support people safely working from there. So things that we saw immediately were things like touchless technologies. So things like automatic doors, having to minimize contact throughout the office, really making people feel safe about their journey into the office, and whilst they're there, being well supported in terms of not having that kind of cross-contamination. So that was kind of the first knee-jerk reaction. I think longer term, looking at the future of the office, where we're looking at more social collaboration spaces. Obviously, what we've missed is throughout the past year is each other, collaboration and culture as a team. So really the future of the office is about how do we entice our staff back into the offices and create more social collaboration spaces for them to share ideas and to further innovate. And I think that's kind of what we're seeing, is that kind of paradigm shift between fixed desking, which is quite our traditional approach, and a more kind of social collaboration office environment.
Sure, and that collaboration space, is it just putting a bunch of couches around? What sort of design and operation of the workplace can actually foster that collaboration beyond, you know, just taking desks out?
Sure. So I think the biggest shift that we've seen is obviously, what are we doing right now? We're all on video conference calls. It's not something commonly that we were previously doing, albeit we were going from office to office and having a lot less time on VC calls within the office. So I would say that the focus is more on those private spaces for people to have those video conference calls with their clients, albeit we can't be in the same meeting room. We need to have those spaces that are acoustically enabled, that are private, that people can have those meetings within the office. So I'd say a very kind of big hybrid shift in terms of, you still need your workstation, but you still need those private spaces. And then to top that all off, let's have some nice kind of collaboration spaces where people can either sit outside on terraces or sit in social areas and meet with their team just for a catch up, is what we all kind of miss.
Sure. Petr, what are you seeing, and how is sort of company culture informing these decisions, and what sort of different decision-making processes are you seeing coming through from companies at the moment? Hang on, I think you're on mute, Petr. There you go.
Oh, I listened to you too much there, the dreaded mute curse. Yeah, it's been a really interesting one, and I think that the question has been quite diverse and it's shifted a lot, over the past 12 months about what people should be implemented within their office. I think what we haven't understood is what that future is going to be, but making a move is incredibly important. I think the only driver that we can really ascertain is company culture being a driving question, and creating the answer is that design process. So I think for us, really understanding and unpicking company culture has really enabled us to get underneath the skin of what it is that we need to provide the future office space. I think everyone would, agree to a certain level that working from home does not facilitate a company culture in any shape or means. And I think whilst it works on some level a couple of days a week, not having a space to create that community, or even create a space where you can just be among, it doesn't mean that you have to collaborate the whole time, but just being a space that you can identify with and create within starts to drive those decision-making processes. And so what we're seeing is not a reduction, not a complete removal from the office space. I think those that have said, nah, we're done with it. We're going to either, everyone's going to work from home for the indefinite future. We're not going to have an HQ. We want to save on our overheads. Actually, the reality is now we need some cluster. We need something that's going to provide a future for our spaces. And so I think, especially on the smaller businesses, they're starting to pivot into different environments that are incredibly high quality spaces. That's a more homely environment, so it feels like a home away from home. At the moment, we're sort of stealing people's personal real estates in their bedrooms, or in their lounges, or in their dining spaces. So it's trying to create that balance between an office space to kind of do your day-to-day working, and then creating that additional community space. And how that's going to evolve is different for every client, but I think people are starting to explore that and how they can start to make a move this year.
Sure, thanks for that. And Dishley, obviously you're sort of an expert on the kind of boutique world. What are the trends you're seeing coming through in that world in terms of the schemes you're producing and the tenants you're working for?
Well, I mean, I should start by saying that it's too early to have any definitive comments on the subject. However, I do not think many businesses will go back to 9 to 5 days a week office routine, as we experience and see certain benefits of working from home. And having said that, I believe offices will continue to play a key role in organizations' culture and identity. I think different companies will have different approaches to this, depending on their size and the requirements of the industry they're in. It might be the case that some companies may prefer relocating to smaller size offices where they can offer more to their employees, or some might just retain same size or even need of more with different configurations, such as lower desk density and larger meeting rooms. I think one of the main shifts will be towards reconfiguration and redefinition of the spaces. So offices that leave the traditional use of workplace and integrate the hybrid working culture, where more spaces are allocated for collaboration and integration, for interaction.
Sure, thanks. Oliver, in terms of Landsec's point of view, you're the biggest property owner in London. You've got a vast portfolio with tenants of every shape and size in it. What are you seeing in terms of the differences of how your tenants are sort of approaching these questions and how they're planning for the future?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think, I guess the first thing to say, and it's been said before earlier in sessions as well, is, it is too early to tell, but I think we're starting to see different businesses, both Landsec customers and just larger businesses generally in the market, start to come out with what they think their future workplace strategies are going to be. And, clearly there's a session with Standard Chartered Bank this morning. There's been various other companies like Salesforce who have come out with a clear strategy going forward, which is a hybrid workforce expectation in terms of part office, part work from home. And I think what's interesting is, it starts to fit in with a number of key drivers for businesses linked to their key business objectives. So not simply cost, but actually thinking about, what's their purpose, what's the impact that they have from a sustainability perspective. Clearly it's a major topic and a big driver now with 2030 targets being set. So sustainability is starting to influence how people are thinking about their real estate strategies, but also the war for talent. And whilst the unemployment rate in the UK has risen as a result of the recessionary environment we have experienced, I think there's an expectation it will bounce back quite quickly. And as a result, you need to make sure that you're giving employees some choice. And I think to link back to what Peter was saying, we anticipate people are going to want to be in providing best-in-class office environments and experiences. And I think Bloomberg was a case in point last year, offering their employees £50 to come into the office for the day. I think you can't just give them financial, monetary incentives to do it, but actually there's clear rationale as to why you want people in the office, which is to collaborate and to come together, to drive innovation, to create that company culture, and to keep learning. And I think there'll be different responses from different demographics of employees and people, but it's actually trying to deal with a number of issues that were prevalent before COVID, but have just been accelerated. So the multi-generational workforce, sustainability was important, but it's just moving up the agenda. So I think we're not seeing knee-jerk reactions from big businesses, but we are seeing differing responses from different businesses in terms of how fast they're going into exploring different strategies.
Sure, and as I say, like a big landlord, when you sort of look on the sort of 5 to 10 year view, do you think it's the eternal question for the office sector? Does this mean kind of the average company has the same amount of space, more space, or less office space overall? I'm going to put you on the spot with that one.
If I'm completely honest, I think it's just too early to tell. I think the points raised before, both by my fellow panel, but also in the sessions before, is that there will be more choice, and therefore the office needs to fulfill a different purpose. The days of sort of rows of desks with a photocopier at the end of it are definitely dead. And if you're doing focused work, why not do that at home? Why not do that in a quiet environment? I think the bit that's not clear is how do you sort of best cater for a hybrid workforce? So if half of us in an office having a meeting and half of us are at home kind of dialing in on Zoom, actually where historically you would have done that just at the tea point for a quick chat for 5 minutes, suddenly everything has to be very organized. You have to have acoustic considerations, you have to have the right type of environment, and also great connectivity, because otherwise those people who aren't in person, and we've all experienced it, you never really pass that meeting. You're sort of always 5 seconds behind trying to contribute, but actually you can't really do it. So I think we've sort of been in the work from home experiment. We've all been forced to work from home, and no one's been face to face. And I think that's the bit that will come through as part of that experimentation going forward. And then hopefully sort of, in the next 3 to 6 months, we'll be back in and starting to see how that plays out. But I think, just to answer your question, I think, there's an expectation probably, that space will decline slightly in terms of what people actually require. But we do think people will use it differently, and we expect people will want better quality experiences and better quality environments. So we have a really big focus on creating best-in-class office spaces across all of our office products. So whether that's our blank canvas traditional Cat A space that people can fit out themselves, Customize, which is a turnkey self-contained space, but just removing that headache for customers, or Myo, which is our fully serviced offering. So all of those are sort of aligned to creating those best experiences, and we see that partnership with our customers, creating great experiences for clients and employees, and a focus on health, well-being and sustainability are going to be the key drivers going forward for how people determine which office spaces they want to be in.
Sure, and we'll come back to that sort of point on sort of quality and fit out, etc. in a moment. But Peter, just to pick up on something you mentioned and something Oliver mentioned there, the kind of different types of occupier and the different size of occupier. Obviously, there's always huge focus on the big companies like the Standard Chartered or the Salesforces, but property is a long tail industry. It's made, the vast majority of occupiers are those kind of SMEs. What are you seeing those kind of companies do at the moment, and how do you see them reacting to these changes, those small and medium-sized enterprises?
I think they're the sort of the trendsetters. They are much more akin to taking risk, and I think they're being a little bit more experimental and playful with, I guess, the opportunities that this pandemic has created. And I think the SMEs, those are going to be the first movers to try new ways of working, and whether it's a blend of, we're obsessed with how much space and whether it's going to be home working or predominantly in the office. But I think it's quality over quantum. And you look at sort of the retail sector; those are the guys that tend to move a lot faster, a lot quicker, and it can be a lot more, it can pivot a lot quicker within market changes. And I think with SMEs and office spaces, you're seeing tenants try different environments in different locations and in different ways of providing an amenity that really works for their staff and employees. I think you take everything from people taking shop fronts as a new office space to kind of engage with the public. That's quite interesting. To taking maybe less typified office spaces, they want that much more kind of honest spaces, if that was the case. It doesn't have to be so clean cut. They want to feel like it's a place with integrity, and it's part of that. Again, it's part of that company culture and that identity that really has to come through, because I think people want to work in spaces and places that mean something, because more and more just working from home in isolation, it feels very much like you're just churning stuff out, because I can't wait to kind of get back to my home life. Actually, if you're going to go back into the office environment, you want to feel like you're part of a community that stands for something, that means something, you're creating and you're working in a space that others want to be a part of. And I think that's so important. And you can see smaller companies start to really look at what their identities are and how that's going to start informing what their cluster of offices are going to be. And I think those first movers are the ones that are going to be much more successful than those that just kind of go, oh, we'll stick it in an unidentified WeWork, which again serves a purpose and is a fantastic solution for some companies. But I think for those that really want to get into their culture and progress their business, there's no other shortcut for that than taking a space that becomes theirs.
Sure. And that's a really interesting segue into the sort of next area that I wanted to touch on, which was that kind of balance between sort of new space and sort of older retrofitted space or secondary quality offices, because we're hearing that mantra that quality will be more important than quantity of office space. So what does that mean for secondary offices and older offices? Do they then sort of become obsolete, Kimberly? How do they compete with the newer developments in terms of providing the right type of space, or will a lot of offices just be sort of converted to other uses, residential, for example?
Yeah, this is a really interesting subject at the moment. What we are definitely seeing is the subpar kind of 10,000 square foot grade B office space becoming quite a high quantum in the market at the moment. And I think there's a couple of kind of themes that sit behind that, and one predominantly being is that those SMEs are looking at their future kind of uncertainty of their business, and they are looking at their workplace strategy, and do they need to take on a long-term lease option, or would they like to perhaps consider something a little bit less risky and go the flex route, which I think is a real big theme at the moment. So I think as a result, we are seeing a lot of those 10,000 square foot grade B spaces coming to the market. I think what this creates is an opportunity for tenants. So we're seeing that tenants still have that requirement for those second offices, and landlords are much more susceptible in terms of financial contributions to bring that Cat B space back to a shell and core or a Cat A standard. So we're seeing a lot of those types of options and movements in the markets, and tenants really having the opportunity to look at this great real estate and work with landlords to get it in a place where it can be fit for their future. So yeah, a really interesting kind of trend at the moment.
Sure. And Dishley, from your point of view, when you're looking at a potential sort of redevelopment of an older office building, what are the sort of costs and benefits and downsides that you're sort of weighing up when it comes to, is it going to be worth kind of redeveloping this building or refurbishing this building? Can we make it into something that the modern workforce is gonna want?
I think for the last year or so, with all the uncertainties, we didn't see many office lease transactions to be able to fully understand where the market will lend itself and where will be the values for these secondary offices. But whether it's a new fitted out office or a secondary office, I think the common requirements will be things like IT and broadband infrastructure, especially for communication technologies, software and access control systems. So in summary, technologies and applications that help manage the flow and density of the office space and enable the businesses to integrate their physical space to virtual meetings and remote working. So while we're looking at the market, with we keep these factors, these aspects in mind. I think what's also very interesting is the use class changes that has been introduced last year, and I think there's still a lot of uncertainty of where we're gonna go with this, but for sure there's more flexibility for office spaces now.
Sure. And Oliver, from your point of view at Landsec, obviously in recent years we've sort of known Landsec for those kind of, you know, big multi-building developments like, you know, Nova at Victoria, etc., and new sort of ground up schemes. Do you see that as the sort of future in terms of, you know, we can create what workers and what companies are going to want if we can do it from the ground up, you know, complete blank canvas? Or do you see opportunity in taking buildings and sort of redeveloping and refurbishing them to bring them up to use?
Yeah, and I think it's going to be a case of sort of what's the scale of the opportunity, and obviously on a case-by-case basis. You know, property is not entirely repeatable. You know, every case is slightly different, but you know, I think the principle of creating places is really important, and not just thinking about the office environment itself upstairs, you know, on the 5th floor, whatever it might be, but actually what's the overall experience, you know, from the ground floor, you know, the amenity, the sort of curation of that experience in that place, and actually how does the building or how does the estate sit within the context of the wider London fabric, you know, and what are you trying to do in terms of bringing in different people. You know, clearly the office employees upstairs are a major driver of that, but also it's thinking about the wider social cohesion and creating those places. So I think for us, you know, we do see a continuation of creating best-in-class office spaces. You know, and we've got a number of schemes that are currently on site and continuing. 21 Moorfields obviously was pre-let to Deutsche Bank, and that's progressing for completion next year. You know, over in the city at Moorgate, and that's sort of 500,000 square feet. You know, we've got Lucent, which is behind Piccadilly Lights, a new office scheme there. And on the South Bank as well, the Forge at Sumner Street is on site and progressing. And we also have optionality on a number of our other schemes across central London. So, you know, we're still very much focused on a combination of development to create best-in-class new buildings, but also refurbishment opportunities where they present themselves. And I think lastly, it's actually looking at how do you continue to evolve your existing assets. You know, Dashwood House is a great example of, you know, a building that was a comprehensive refurbishment completed in 2009, 2010, so 10 years ago. But actually we are completely repositioning that building. We've put a new Landsec lounge in and cafe at ground floor, a whole new cycle facility, showers, lockers. You know, it's amazing how time passes, but actually back in 2009, cycling certainly wasn't as prevalent as it is today. And I think we only see COVID accelerating that. So again, it's about creating that end-to-end customer and employee journey where we're creating the best amenities and facilities for people to be able to experience. And then also from a sort of property perspective, giving them a choice of different products. So within that building, it's the first one where we'll have a combination of our blank canvas, so traditional Cat A space. We've got a customized show floor that's completed on level 2. So a self-contained space, you know, but we've fully built it out, ready to occupy. And rather than, I guess, Cat A Plus sometimes leaves quite a lot to be done, you know, this is you can walk straight in and operate. So fully complete space, but with optionality on certain aspects of design. And then lastly, Mayo will be opening in April. So with 4 floors, 35,000 square feet. And, that will provide complete flexibility from, sort of 5 people up to whole floors, with dedicated meeting rooms and amenity space. So I think what we're thinking going forward is, how do we create a sort of an ecosystem within the building, but also one that sits within the right fabric and the right part of London and responds to those particular demands, and ultimately is going to create a really productive workplace and environment for employees and for businesses to thrive.
With that kind of that sort of leads nicely onto the sort of next question that I was going to ask about flexibility. With that kind of turnkey space, I mean, what are the sort of pros and cons of that? Because obviously it demands a sort of bigger fit out contribution from the landlord up front. But so does that sort of still work into the sort of financial models that you can still sort of, get the rents you need to make that sort of worthwhile, rather than just that traditional, leaving the tenant to take on a lot of the fit out?
Yeah, and I think that's why we're not being prescriptive and saying you have to take a particular product or you have to have a certain thing, a certain type of space. So what we're looking at is, how do we create choices around the physical space that you take, whether that's Cat A or blank canvas as we call it, whether it's a turnkey solution that's already ready to move into, that choice is over to the customer. I think what we are seeing is, in the sort of sub 10,000, sub 15,000 square foot market, that's where we see more demand for, a landlord provided fit out with some customization, as opposed to the very large spaces, where ultimately those customers, the bigger, more corporate established businesses, have their own real estate teams. They have their own expertise in house, everything from IT to architecture to project management. They generally have that experience because they're operating often across the UK or even globally. So they have their corporate standards that are set, and actually what they want us to deliver is a best-in-class base build that has great levels of fresh air allowances. It's got flexibility. It's a really sustainable environment. But I think what we'll see is a movement more towards the shell and core delivery. So rather than the wasteful kind of put all the Cat A in, and then the incoming customer will sort of take half of that out, and a lot of it will go to waste, we'll see more of a sort of taking space on from shell and core, or refitting spaces, combining Cat A and Cat B. And then on the smaller scale, so when I say smaller scale, 10 to 15,000 square feet, still not insignificant, but we're delivering that customized choice. So rather than just giving everyone a generic fit out and saying it's always the same in this building, it's giving people a bit more choice around some of the finishes, around the aesthetics, around, do they want to occupy at a high density, a lower density? Do they need private offices? What's their requirements around meeting room numbers? And then also layering in service. So managed services as part of that customized offering as well. So really removing that headache for those smaller businesses who just don't have that expertise. And I think, the real estate industry has been a little bit guilty for a while of just handing over the keys and expecting a quarterly rent check. And we've got to think much more like service operators and service providers, delivering solutions that are aligned to what customers want, and giving them more choice.
Sure. And on that front, Peter, obviously the flexible office operators, they had a tough time. The shorter leases that they operate on have made them sort of quite exposed during the pandemic. But also, they've got that kind of flexibility built into their design. So when things do get back to something approaching normal, there's a school of thought that they should be very well placed to sort of capitalize. So where do the operators in those sectors go in terms of the design and the amenity and the offering that they provide? How do you see them sort of evolving in the future?
I think it's really interesting that, again, within each product that's out there, there's a differing style, an aesthetic that's associated with each one of those products. I think, we were lucky enough to work with Mayo on their first outfit over in Victoria, alongside Soda. And that was kind of an interesting concept around having that central hub of community and activation that created that sort of cultural hub, and then sort of the offices fitted around that became your personal space. And that was kind of an interesting concept. There was an element of adaptiveness that you could implement, you know, in your own space that fitted into a wider community. And I think there's a product there that's quite exciting. We're looking at supplementary spaces for larger co-working operators that are already faltering because they're not applicable anymore to the current market. And as sort of the borders of the city and city fringe are shifting all over the place, they're having to appeal to different tenant markets. So we're looking at adapting those spaces. And I think
sorry to interrupt. Tell us what's wrong with them or what's not working about them in this kind of market, without naming names, obviously, but tell us what doesn't work today.
I think people want, you know, there's a higher demand as tenants are looking for potentially shorter or more flexible leases. They're willing to spend more on their capex, you know, in terms of a monthly outgoing rather than a whole load of cash up front to do their own fit out. You're having to look at providing spaces that provide a level of integrity and that's, you know, specific to them. At the same time, you're doing a fit out. So, you know, the realms of Cat A Plus offer that element of, you know, you've already done the fit out, you've already done the hard work, and they have to kind of put up their logo. But again, within that, you're looking at variations of a Cat A Plus that start to become adaptive to what your future tenant might want. In terms of the specifics, you know, it could be from, you know, whether it's just a breakup of desking to meeting rooms or to breakout spaces. But I think there's a layer on that about how in each one of these spaces, again, going back to the culture as a point, allow their culture to be more, to be incubated and to kind of, you know, go to the next stages within that. And I think ultimately each one of these elements, you know, none of these are bad, you know, it's a kind of sense that they're not fundamentally not working, they could just be better. So I think it's about how do you, you know, layer up what's already there, because it doesn't have to be a complete rip it all out, go again. It could be tweaking and moderating and refining in some cases. In others, yeah, it's not quite up to standard and you do have to go again, which we're obviously trying to avoid, mostly from an environmental perspective than anything else. And so again, it's just about how can we shift to different markets. So again, you know, like I say, it's on a case-by-case basis, and people don't want to feel like they're just in another generic space. They want to feel like it's theirs. And I think how do you, working with tenants on a much more intimate level, can really unpick what they actually want rather than just base numbers. It's not just looking at a BCA standard and going, oh, it hits X, Y, Z. There's something kind of more intuitive that you need to understand to really, you know, get under the skin of a tenant, and then kind of maybe work with them more closely to, you know, identify the right office for them rather than they've already got a lease. Can you help them design it?
Sure. Thank you for that. Go on, Kimberly.
I was just going to add to that. I think one of the challenges the flexible operators face, kind of further to what Peter was saying, is around their USP is being challenged, because this working from home culture and how can they adapt and improve their product ultimately to entice people to come into their spaces, I think is one of the challenges. And I think underpinning all of this, a theme that we're starting to see, obviously due to the current market conditions, is these flexible operators are, you know, they're quite nervous about taking on these long-term leases. So I'm not sure you're seeing this as well, Oliver, but management agreements are becoming quite more popular in the market at the moment. So whereby landlords need the flexible operators to fill their buildings, they're taking on more responsibility in terms of that type of kind of turnkey approach and delivering a full Cat A and Cat B service offering, and then entering into a management agreement with a flexible operator. And essentially that model works well if both parties kind of benefit commercially from that outturn, but it's a risk to both. But it's something that we certainly haven't seen quite of a theme within the UK. It's more common in the US, but given kind of the market conditions and flexible operators being a little bit more cautious around those kind of long-term commitments, management agreements are becoming quite common as well.
Sure. Oliver, you've got Myo as your own in-house offering, but how do you feel about management agreements versus leases with the flex operators?
I'm trying not to end up down a rabbit hole here, but yeah, and I think, you know, the challenge on the management agreement obviously is about the alignment of risk and return. And you know, I think we all know property is very capital intensive. So the challenge as ever is when, you know, a business needs to fit out a space. You know, I'm talking about the flex side here, to actually be able to operate and have that unique USP. It is capital intensive, and therefore the question comes, well, who's funding that, and how's the payback or cash flow waterfall split up and divide between, you know, owner and operator? You know, where's the incentive to make sure they're operating on the right basis? So I think, you know, it's not to say that they don't work, because actually the hotel sector, you know, is much more familiar with management agreements, and I think there's probably a bit more maturity to come before people really sort of get their heads around it. And I think also, you know, the flex operators, you know, a lot of them haven't necessarily got the trading history and the track record for people to be able to feel there's reliance. And lastly, you know, there's not necessarily that brand recognition. You know, the hotel sector, you've got clear brand recognition of, you know, what is a Marriott, what is, you know, a Hilton, what is these different brands and what do they stand for? You know, you then sort of choose which one you want to suit your particular needs at that time. But I think, you know, just coming back to the flex market, I think, you know, we do see that there's going to be greater demand for more flexibility, and it's just how do we continue to evolve our offering to best suit people's needs. So, you know, when Myo was set out to deliver sort of 1 to 5 year agreements, you know, with generally sort of more fixed desks, we're now looking at how do we best accommodate future needs for, you know, that hybrid working, you know, desk booking systems, you know, even for small customers who wouldn't even consider that in the past, you know, and now starting to think about, well, some of my team will be in 3 days a week, and how do I make sure the right people come in at the right time and that there's a desk available for them? So it's actually sort of bringing some of that service down to the more grassroots level and the smaller businesses is really important. And that will, again, you know, make us stand out compared to some others who just sort of, you know, fit out the space and hope that they'll come, which, you know, won't necessarily stand the test of time. So I think there will be more requirement for flexibility, but I think the challenge for real estate is it's very capital intensive from a fit out perspective. So how do you balance that sort of business expectation of flexibility whilst also, you know, the capital investment required to create those best environments? And as a result, we don't see for those blank canvas spaces people suddenly wanting really short leases, because they want to be able to amortize their fit out over a longer period of time. But actually it's then how do you layer in that service and flexibility elsewhere in the building? And that's where, you know, Myo or Customized provide different solutions for people, so they can feel confident in their core space take, knowing that there's flexibility within that building or within the portfolio they can access easily as well. And there are various examples of, you know, where we've had success with customers in Victoria taking space in Myo, who are, you know, our traditional blank canvas customers and needed it for overflow space for a period of time whilst other options became available in the building. And it comes back to that long-term partnership piece, which we really think will be a differentiator.
Sure. And Dishley, how, from the point of view of a sort of boutique developer, how are you dealing with some of these issues on sort of working with flex operators or working with clients to give them the flexibility they need, but also, you know, making it work financially as well?
Due to size of the office spaces that we developed, I don't think that I'm the expert on flexible offices or operators, but I mean, we try to design the spaces in a well-thought manner to add value. And I think it's a bit of collaboration between landlord and tenant as well. So we are believing that the office spaces that we're creating will provide the flexibility for the different requirements of different businesses.
Sure. And just, Kimberly, to pick up on something you mentioned earlier about kind of knee-jerk reactions versus, you know, kind of what people are actually going to need going forward. Obviously, we saw the announcements yesterday on, you know, the gradual sort of opening up of society again. Not a huge amount in there on kind of when people are going to be encouraged to go back to the office, but a general kind of plan towards a return to, you know, something more approaching sort of normality. Has the vaccine rollout, you know, changed people's views towards some of those technologies that you talked about earlier, towards, you know, how we're actually going to interact and work when we're in the office? You know, are people sort of working on the basis that if we're all vaccinated, it's all going to be back to normal? Or how do you think the kind of rollout is going to go over the next few months?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think tenants seem to remain quite cautiously optimistic about the return to work strategy. I think, you know, as many of us have said, it's probably too early to tell, but certainly some of the clients that I've met with and been working with definitely have that medium to long-term goal to get back to the office, because they appreciate all of the positive things that come with collaboration and being together and all the things that we can't achieve over a screen. So I'd say that kind of human nature, social interaction won't ever go away. So it's certainly something that is still in the forefront of their mind, and it's informing a lot of their real estate strategies and the transactions that we're seeing going on in the market currently. So I'd say that some of the things that we've probably naturally adopted and some of our tenants are looking at is they need to be able to support their staff in terms of a safe return to the office. So they need to be a lot more flexible with things like, you know, building our operations when people can attend the office. So that's been a bit of a shift. So in terms of access to the office and how the building is set up to support that. We've also got things like, you know, cleaning regimes and fogging and, you know, these air purification systems, which are all quite hot topics at the moment and are being looked at, you know, both from a developer and a tenant standpoint to see, you know, what are the benefits there. I'd say a lot of those types of mechanisms are definitely beneficial. They're positive things, and I think they send the right cultural message to people to say, look, tenants are making changes to support staff to return to the office, and that ultimately will encourage them to return. So there are things like that are going on. And then kind of contactless technologies and smart buildings are still a very hot topic. So, you know, making the workspace a much more kind of smarter space, so there's less of that interaction. That also starts as early from a kind of shell and core design right through to fit out. So making sure that things like, you know, smart buildings are being thought about in the early days, such that once tenants occupy, then those kind of mechanisms are in place, are also quite popular as well.
Sure, thanks for that. Just to move, as we move towards the end of the session, a few questions coming in from our audience. Oliver, for your blank canvas spaces, who should carry the financial risk of possible future lockdowns? Owner, occupier, or insurer?
I'm not sure we've got time to answer that one, Mike, with 2 minutes to go. So can I duck it? No, maybe not. Look, I think it's a really interesting point here, isn't it? You know, I think in our experience, know that obviously the smaller businesses are more financially susceptible to shocks, and is trying to take, you know, the right approach for the right business at the right time. You know, and Landsec set out across the whole of our portfolio, which includes retail, an £80 million support fund for our customers through the COVID pandemic. So, you know, I think it's very important that we do the right thing as a business and we support the wider economy. But equally, I think it's important that everyone sort of plays their part, and there shouldn't be a case of, you know, individuals having to take on particular risk as far as possible. And I think it's how do you spread that risk appropriately between the parties. So I think it's really kind of case by case, depending on business size, depending on what the situation is with that particular lease, but it is going to come up more and more, without doubt, that question.
Sure. Peter, one for you here. We hear so much about, and you know, it's obviously a vital topic and increasing in importance, mental health and the workplace, and you know, making sure, you know, workers are kind of being supported on that mental health and well-being side. What sort of, if you had to point to sort of 2 or 3 key design principles that can sort of, you know, be effective on that side of things, what would you point to?
I mean, I don't think it's a hard one in that there's no like one answer. I think it's more of a policy piece than a design piece. Mental health is becoming obviously an increasing issue. you know, put myself out there that I struggle from, you know, from time to time being isolated. I like being around people. People like people. I like being, you know, able to hug and, you know, interact with friends and you know, colleagues appropriately. That it's a nice thing to be around, and the office space is actually part of a community that can facilitate that. I think with COVID at the moment, it prohibits it, but I think that's a policy piece, which is, again, company culture, that has got to be at the forefront of how you support your staff, you know, providing outlets and making sure that people know that there's somewhere to go. And I don't think everyone always knows that. You know, it can feel very isolating, especially from working from home. That, who do I talk to anymore? Do I talk to HR? Is that kind of a thing? Do I talk to my, you know, superior? Is that a thing? Do I talk to a mate? Well, they're not around. I can't have that little moment, that little, you know, I need an outlet. And I think, again, the office provides that. It could just be that 10 seconds on the stairs. You know, that really irritated me. And it's those little valves that you just don't have from working from home. So it's just being able to get back into the office in a safe environment. But as a specific design point, I don't think there is one. I just think it comes down to policy.
Okay, well, thank you so much. That's a great point to end. The sort of 10-second gripe on the stairs could be the thing that saves the office ultimately, and that's a very good thing. Well, thank you so much to all of our panel for their fantastic insights into that topic. To our audience, we've got one more panel still to come afterwards, so sort of head back to the lobby area and log back into that one. Thank you so much to you all for joining us for this panel, where we've looked at some of the, you know, really interesting short-term changes that are going on, but also some of those longer-term changes which will take many years to play out, but will doubtless have a sort of fundamental impact on the world of work. So thank you so much all for your insight. Hope, as I say, the audience can join us for our last session, but for now, thank you so much all for your time. Take care.
Thank you.